Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. Starting in 1660, three great new forces began to reshape the British colonies in North America. They were the economic regulations embodied in new Trade and Navigation Acts, the partial systematization of imperial administration, and the contest with the French and natives for dominion over the continent. By the turn of the century, the colonists numbered about 250,000 and were increasing at a rate that has seldom been equaled in the history of Western nations. Immigration, early marriages, the economic value of children in an agricultural society, and the relatively high level of health spread this growth, giving the British a 10-to-1 advantage and superiority in numbers over the French in North America. Within a century, the British had 13 flourishing colonies on the Atlantic coast: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. How did colonization take place in what is now considered the southern part of the United States? A variety of motives, political, religious, and economic, contributed to the settling of the Atlantic seaboard. Both labor and capital in England had become fairly fluid by the early 1600s and were seeking more profitable fields. A sharp rise in prices and living costs made many people restless. The increase in sheep grazing and the fencing in of former common lands drove many from the soil. Bold young men, including younger sons of the gentry, losing in peace the occupation which the wars with Spain had given them, looked abroad. Many Englishmen saw that the colonization of the New World might contribute to the power and influence of the mother country, and that Spain, Portugal, and other lands should be given competitors. Finally, the spread of great commercial trading companies assisted in the work. In Virginia, settlement followed an entirely different pattern from its counterparts to the north. There, the colonists spread out widely up the creeks and rivers, soon moving westward as far as the falls of the James River, where the city of Richmond now stands. Partly because tobacco rapidly impoverished the soil, they tilled land in much larger units, known as plantations, with almost no village centers, and they made much greater use of servants than did New England. This pattern was unfavorable to social life, cooperation, and communal activities, but it created quite as strong a spirit of independence as that existing farther north. Throughout the 17th century, the planters preferred white indentured servants to black Africans or Native Americans, and for a time, as many as 1,500 arrived every year. They were mainly English, with an admixture of Scotch and Irish, and in general bound themselves, in return for transportation and support, to work without wages for from 3 to 7 years. This indenture or redemptioner system became a highly efficient aid to colonization. When they had worked out their terms, the servants moved up the streams, took land, began shipping tobacco from their own wharves, and thus became in turn independent planters or freehold farmers. The natural political units in Virginia were parishes and counties. Parish institutions were chiefly ecclesiastical, but under the English system they included education. Every minister kept a school, and the vestry saw to it that all poor children could read and write. Children of prosperous families usually had private tutors. The counties increased in number to keep pace with the steady spread of population. By 1652, Virginia had 13 counties, of which 9 lay on the James River and 2 on the York. The county courts held large powers of local government and tended to come under the control of a few influential families. An elected assembly, known as the House of Burgesses, was practically elected on restricted manhood suffrage. Like the Middle Colonies, the lands south of Virginia were also colonized under royal grants to great proprietors. Under English King Charles II, a group of 8 men obtained a grant of all North America between the 31st and 36th parallels. 2 segments of the Great Domain were developed in very different ways. Charleston, South Carolina, was founded in 1670 with settlers from England and overcrowded Barbados. Groups of French Huguenots and Scots at once migrated to South Carolina, giving it by the year 1700 a population, including black African slaves, of about 5,000. The colony had much fertile soil, which allowed the area to become a major exporter of foodstuffs. At first, the colony was based on exports of food to the West Indies and of turpentine, tar, and furs to Europe. Then rice was introduced from Madagascar, and the South Carolinians developed large plantations which grew rice and indigo very profitably. The area to the north, meanwhile, was settled in moderate-sized farms by a variety of immigrants: British, Germans, drifters from Virginia, and adventurous New Englanders. A settlement of Swiss at New Bern added one specially prosperous element. The proprietors gave each colony a simple, workable form of government with governor, council, and assembly. In the Carolinas, as in Virginia, population spread widely over the land, and though Charleston became an opulent and fashionable little city, other towns were few and small. In social and economic character, the 2 colonies differed sharply. North Carolina found that its tobacco and naval stores shipped from poor harbors offered much less revenue than South Carolina's staples. North Carolina had no merchants and ship captains to match those of Charleston, and very few planters. Its populace was poor, ill-educated, and restless, and only a few coastal centers had any touch of learning or aristocratic manners. In South Carolina, however, many planters accumulated wealth at their country estates, where they lived most of the year. They had fine town houses in Charleston, where in the hottest summer months they kept up a pleasant social life with rich traders and professional men. And they gave the Commons House, as they called the Assembly, an English tone. But North Carolina had 2 compensations. Its white population grew much faster than that of South Carolina, while slaves were fewer, and its people had a much stronger sense of democracy. Georgia, the last of the 13 colonies to be founded, was the creation of a group of British philanthropists. These proprietors, obtaining a grant of lands between the Savannah and Altahama rivers, hoped to give debtors and other deserving poor people a new start in life. In 1733, they sent over 100 settlers to establish the town of Savannah. Some of the regulations imposed by the trustees were more idealistic than realistic. Slavery was prohibited. The importation of rum, brandy, and other strong drink was forbidden. And to prevent the growth of large estates, every charity colonist was restricted to 50 acres of land, which he might transmit only to a male heir. This benevolent paternalism retarded the growth of Georgia. The settlers quickly found that they needed larger units of land for economic tillage, and that slave labor would be advantageous. They wanted to exchange their lumber for importations of rum from the West Indies. The trustees gradually liberalized their rules, while in 1751 they allowed the colonists to elect an assembly. The following year, when their tenure of the proprietorship lapsed, they made no effort to renew it but allowed the Crown to take over Georgia. As a Crown colony, it still remained so weak that it needed constant subsidies. Its agriculture became more and more like that of South Carolina, and it developed a society of slave-owning planters in the lowlands, merchants in Savannah, and small farmers in the uplands. But the philanthropists had accomplished 3 valuable results. They had saved a considerable number of neglected and abused people. They had maintained a buffer between the other southern colonies and Spanish Florida, and they had laid the foundation for one of the greatest of the southern states. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.